So the 31st of this month, Halloween, has another significant meaning to me. This year will be 2 years to the day since this happened. In 2016, my grandfather, who may as well have been my father, passed away. He lived in a small house, which I had shared for a few years not too long before his passing. In the small town I live in the south of Ireland. His passing was quite devastating to myself and my family, and for that reason, childhood memories and connections to the house made it quite difficult for us to visit the house. Fast forward to Halloween 2 years ago, and the Hoover we use at home broke, and we don't exactly have the money to buy new things at the drop of a hat. So my mother said she was thinking of going to my grandfather's house to get the one there. To spare her the emotional journey into the house, I volunteered to go and asked a long-time friend of mine who knew the house to accompany me. We arrive at the house at about midday, maybe as late as 2 p.m, and go inside. Nothing is out of the ordinary, just silent and hollow, with a void where my granddad used to be. My friend, who I'll call H, had known me since we were in 6th class, about 8 years now, and used to come over all the time for years. He knew the house and my family inside out. We walked around the house in a sort of nostalgic silence, speaking occasionally about memories we shared there years before as we looked around. Eventually, we made it to the back door of the house, and out to the garden where a trampoline and a wooden shed where we used to play stood, still containing old things from our past. And this is when the main event of the day came. Having finished looking around out there, we turned to go inside. As I locked the shed door and the garden gate, me and H heard a phone ringing. I didn't think anything of it, as I had seen the next door neighbour's back door open only a few moments before and assumed it was there. That was until H called my name and I turned to look at him. He was standing right at the back door of the house, while I was about 5 meters further away, and he stared at me blankly and said, "The phone?" I said, "Yeah, it's the neighbour's," and he replied, "No, it's inside the house," before swiftly turning and walking inside. I was confused and followed him quickly. Now, the layout of the house from front to back is this. You enter the back door, and you're in a small, maybe 1 by 1 meter square porch. From there, a door leads into the kitchen, which takes up the back half of the ground floor of the house and connects directly to the much smaller sitting room. When I entered the kitchen, I stood looking at H, standing beside my grandfather's chair, where we sat every day for as long as I can remember. Next to the chair was a small wooden table with a landline sitting on it, and it was ringing. Me and H looked at each other shocked, as the phone line had been disconnected for more than 2 years at this point, and the electricity was disconnected, meaning no lights, no nothing. H picked up the phone and answered, repeating "hello" a few times, before saying "there's no one there," and holding the phone out for me to come over and take it from him. I did, and I said "hello" a few times. "Is there anyone there?" But I was not greeted with any response. All I could hear was a slight static, and the tone you would know if you ever had a wired landline. The one you hear when you pick it up and listen before dialing any numbers. After a few moments, I hung up the phone and left it for a short while, and picked it up again, hearing the same tone, slight static, and nothing else. I picked it up and put it down maybe 6 or 7 times, before leaving it, after realizing that the phone line was not only disconnected, but also was plugged out from the wall. Me and H decided to try to call the phone from his mobile, but it didn't ring, and instead we got a tone that indicates an invalid number. We tried again a few times to no avail, and then tried to call both of our mobiles from the house phone. After dialing the numbers, neither of our phones rang, nor did the phone sounds indicate it had dialed, or that it was ringing. A few minutes more passed, and we were sitting down wondering what was going on, until I picked up the phone again, and all the noises was gone, and as many times as I picked it up again, it never came back. This was very confusing and emotional for me. I'd consider myself a bit of a soft touch, but my friend would be a much harder type. It takes a lot for him to get upset. We both sat there in tears, wondering if this was some sign from my granddad or something else. It's been 2 years, and on occasion I've been back to the house, and each time I pick up the phone to hear the usual dead silence. First off, let me explain a few things. Even though I'm married, my partner works nights, so I'm home alone from roughly 8 pm to 7 am each day. I sleep alone. 2. My bedroom is on the ground floor. I live in a rancher. There are 2 windows in my bedroom, one directly at the head of my bed. There's no headboard to my bed, so this window is directly above my head as I sleep. Now, with the colder weather, I've been sleeping with both bedroom windows open. And 3, instead of mulch for our flower beds, we have these small red pebbles, and when walked up, you can audibly hear each footstep. The flower bed wraps around the house and stops just beyond my bedroom window. For the past few nights, I've awoken out of a dead sleep to the sound of someone or something walking on these pebbles outside my window. I haven't been sleeping with a TV, sound maker, or anything else that could make noise. No AC, no heater, no nothing. So when I go to sleep, it's completely quiet aside from the crickets outside. As I leave my window at the head of my bed open about 5 inches. I distinctly remember hearing a branch snap outside my window and the sound of walking on the pebbles 2 nights ago. This happened roughly around 3 am as well. So just now, I woke up from a dead sleep to a cat angrily snarling outside my window. I don't know how it registered in my brain so quickly, but I woke up out of a dead sleep, turned around to face the window, pulled open the blinds, and not 2 feet away was this cat, just staring off to the left, just snarling like it was being provoked. Now I have a cat. She's indoors, and only a small one. Cannot reach either bedroom window. She wasn't even in the room with me when this happened, as after I yelled at the outside cat to go away, I went searching for my own, while she was asleep on our bathroom rug. But this really isn't normal cat hunting behaviour. I've had many cats in the past, mostly outdoor and indoor, and while hunting they don't necessarily growl. They really only do that when either they're fearful or being provoked, so that makes this much stranger. And the fact that after I yelled at this cat, it just kind of lost focus on whatever it was growling at, turned and slowly walked off. It didn't run like it was scared or fleeing, it just simply stopped, turned towards me, looked at me, turned away, and slowly walked away. At first I was skeptical, but I've come to know without a doubt that my partner is gifted with necromancy, or the ability to communicate with the dead. He says that he inherited this gift from his mother, who was quite versed in her craft. She was a witch, and a very good, kind and holistic one at that. Sadly, he lost his mother when he was 17, and she was only in her early 40s. Such a young life cut short, but she passed on something special. In my small, mostly rural hometown, which is a 3-hour drive from the larger city where we live, is a cemetery which contains the grave of a little girl who tragically passed away at only 2 years old in 1886. I'll omit her name out of respect. Stories say that she and her mother had made a batch of apple butter together. The little girl got up in the night and went into the kitchen to sneak some remnants of the sweet, spiced delicacy from inside the pot. Unknown to the family, the pot was made of lead and had been corroding. Sadly, the little girl was poisoned by this lead and didn't live beyond those tender, innocent 2 years. According to local legend, the little girl's grave is said to be haunted. The gravestone itself is a life-size statue of her which her parents had commissioned. It was rendered from an actual portrait of her taken shortly before she died. The statue of the girl is on top of a pedestal, made of the same type of stone. So the gravestone is about 7 feet tall in total. In the statue rendering, the girl's hands are folded in her lap. Somehow, the statue always holds flowers inside the clasped hands, though no one knows who leaves them, because no one has ever seen placing them or removing the old bouquet. The flowers are just always there. One local legend states that if someone snatches the flower bouquet from the clasped hands of the statue at midnight, they can hear the little girl crying. Though I've always taken interest in ghosts and the supernatural, I never attempted this, because for one, I was too scared, but mostly, the mere thought of doing it made me feel sad. My partner and I took a trip to my hometown to visit my family. This was his first time ever visiting my neck of the woods, so it was totally unfamiliar to him. Naturally, after hearing the local legend of the little girl who haunted her own grave, my partner wanted to visit the cemetery to see if we could get any readings from her, so we made the short drive there. It's only a few miles from my parents' place. As we approached the cemetery, he said he thought he could faintly hear a little girl's voice, but all he could make out was, "My feet hurt, my feet hurt." Didn't make any sense. This little girl was only 2 years old. Why would she have sore feet? Was this even the entity we intended to reach, or was some other spirit trying to connect? The voice grew slightly louder to him once we entered the cemetery, and even more so as we got closer to the site. Though still very faint, he could definitely now hear "feet hurt" as clear as day. When we finally reached her gravesite, we were shocked to discover that her statue had been vandalized. The feet had been knocked off. This occurrence really opened my eyes as to how real my partner's gift was. There have been other instances over time which have given me more solid confirmation, but I'll never forget the chill I got from this one. And he misses his mother every day. I wish I could have met her and that she had been a part of my life, but from what I've heard, experienced and witnessed over the last 5.5 years, a part of her most definitely lives on with the person I love. I have a feeling that she is indeed a part of my life, just not in the way most people experience here in the physical world. I was at my ex-girlfriend's house. I was staying the night and we were up late anyway, so it was roughly 1 a.m. I was up in her room writing music on my laptop, while she was downstairs working on her coursework for college. It was very silent in her room, almost still and eerie. The music I was making sounded too clean. Her bedroom door suddenly flung open and caught her sideboard making a huge bang, scaring the life out of me. It just broke the silence like thunder. At that point, I was already shit scared. A couple seconds later, whilst the door swings shut, I hear a faint girlish laugh coming from the corridor. The more I focused on it, the louder and clearer it became. I assumed at this point it was my ex outside the door playing a prank on me. I decided to play her ruse, and so I started counting down from 10 out loud, saying that I was going to open the door and tickle her. I started counting down from 10, 9, 8. The giggling turned into laughing, and it increased in volume. I sounded playful, almost bordering on maniacal. The longer I counted, the door started to shake, as if she was banging against it. I got up off the bed and crept towards the door. 5, 4, 3. The laughing continued to tease me, maybe even enticing me in. I reached up to the door handle and gripped it with my hand. I swung the door open with all my strength and jumped through the doorway, planning to land on her and tickle her. I landed in the corridor and my feet slammed down, and in that same moment, the laughing abruptly stopped, with no warning. I was alone in the corridor. It took me a few moments to gather myself, and I proceeded to pace the corridor looking for her. The slow realization that she was never there started to dawn on me. I sprinted down the stairs, feeling as if a presence was following me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see her. I opened the living room door to find her hunched over her books, headphones in at full volume. I grabbed the headphones off her, and she looked up at me surprisingly. I asked if she had just been upstairs laughing outside her room. She swore to me that she hadn't left the spot in front of the TV since she started her revision a few hours earlier. I told her about what just happened, and she didn't look surprised at all, which made me really confused. She told me that the whole family has experienced a little girl in the house. 2 months later, I was back at her house and we were in the garden. I was stroking the cat outside, and my ex tapped me on the shoulder and looked at a bedroom window. We could see a figure of what looked like a little girl standing at a window. I was very stunned, and it shook me to the core, but to them it seemed like an everyday experience. I've had lots of different experiences with the paranormal, most of them super mild. Grew up in a definitely haunted house. But things that happened there have kind of kept repeating throughout my life, well after moving out. I did meet with a medium about a year back, and she informed me that I definitely have the sight as well as the ability to interact tacitly. She mentioned that I had somehow turned off that ability as if I had a blindfold over my sight or something, which aligned with my timeline of experiences, as she mentioned that normally happens with some sort of scare or general fear regarding the paranormal, and I definitely had big fears, and a week in my life that ended in my asking a pastor to bless my house. But I wanted to talk and ask about dreams in particular. I've experienced sleep paralysis for sure, but when I do, I can never open my eyes. Even so, I've not really seen anything necessarily. In fact, it's usually very hard for me to even tell if I'm awake. These experiences are very Inception movie-like, and I have no idea what they really are. Normally, they start with me presumably dreaming and waking up. If I don't have sleep paralysis, I can open my eyes, and I'm always in the room that I fell asleep in. Even if I'm visiting someone else's home, which is why it's very hard for me to tell if I'm really asleep. My first experience with this was in the haunted house I grew up in. This was the week that really scared me and was accompanied with sleep paralysis. I would wake up and it was like I was out of my body and could see myself laying down. I would be extremely heavy, and while I could see the entire room, I couldn't move a single muscle. It felt like my body was made of lead. There was nothing wrong with the way the room looked, but there was an overwhelmingly bad feeling, and I intuitively felt something is trying to possess me. As soon as I had that revelation, I would try to fight to open my eyes. And eventually when I did, all the bad feelings would go away. Sometimes I would wake up to 3 times within a dream before actually being awake in real life. After I learned I had the power to rebuke negative energy myself, I spent one night doing that, and those dreams stopped for a long time. The next meaningful one happened about 2 years later. It was just one day that it happened, and it was the same feeling. I couldn't open my eyes or twitch my fingers, but I knew I had to. I was also living in a different place. My roommate was next to me, and the light was on. That one wasn't as scary. That was the last time I experienced paralysis. Years passed before the next one, and this is possibly the scariest one. I was at my mom's, not the same house I grew up in, and sleeping in my brother's room by myself. I had a weird feeling because I had to sleep on the trundle since the dog had gotten on top of his bed and peed directly on my shopping bag, soaking through the mattress pad and mattress itself. We assumed it was her because it was just so much liquid, but it didn't smell. Anyways, I fell asleep, and at some point in the middle of the night, I got up to go to the bathroom. I came back to the room and got back into the bed to go back to sleep. When I was about to fall asleep, I heard a big knock on the wall that woke me right up and scared the crap out of me. I decided I did not want to be alone and got up and went to my sister's room, as she has a futon in there. At this point, I was definitely dreaming, though I didn't know that at the time. I laid down, started falling asleep, and something else startled me awake again. When I opened my eyes, though, I was actually awake and in my brother's room again, on the trundle. I have no idea when that dream started. Safe to say, I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Now, that was about a year ago. Last night, I had another experience in my new home. I woke up and turned over as one sometimes does. However, I noticed our bedroom door was open when it was closed previously. I remember being scared, alert, trying to rationalize it in my head, and eventually decided that my husband had probably gotten up at some point for some water and forgotten to close the door again. I remember laying back down and turning to look at the door being opened several times because it just made me uncomfortable. Eventually, I went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, though, it was closed again. I asked my husband about it, and he said that he hadn't gotten up to get anything and that I was probably just dreaming that it was open. I'm just so confused. These dreams are mundane as can be for the most part. They just involve things that are slightly off. Has anyone else experienced anything like that? In 2015, my father went through a bad alcohol withdrawal mixed with pneumonia, which sent him to an intensive care unit unconscious. At the time, I was 16 years old and was trying to accept the fact that I had to say goodbye. I stayed in the hospital next to him each night until he passed. One day, my two aunts, his sisters, came by together to say their goodbye. I greeted them at the hospital entrance and escorted them over to my dad's room. Here's where things became unexplainable. As my aunts entered the room together, they both stopped dead in their tracks and looked at each other. Tears were rolling down one aunt's face, and the other was just awestruck. "Do you smell that?" one said to the other. "Yes, I do. It's her." Now, I had zero clue what they were talking about. It freaked me out, watching my aunts just stop and stare at each other, communicating seemingly without words. I finally asked, "What's going on? What are you guys talking about?" They explained to me that they could smell their mother's perfume. It was a scent that wasn't produced anymore, something they remembered from when they were children. I did smell a scent as well, but I figured it was one of the nurses. Once they explained to me how the scent was their mother's old perfume, the smell vanished. After acknowledging the smell, it went away. The three of us were immediately skeptical, and one of my aunts, the crazier one, subtly walked near each nurse working at the time to see if they had a similar perfume. Nope. There was no explanation we could think of, besides the fact that my grandmother's spirit was in that room, visiting my passing father for a moment. The fact that they both stopped at the same time, looked at each other, and knew exactly what the other was thinking is what gets me. It's not like one mentioned it to the other and a type of placebo effect occurred. Instead, they had the same reaction at the exact same time. That's the key to the story that makes me believe. Our parents met when we were babies. We were practically sisters. I came from a rough background, so I happened to be with them more than I was not. We probably knew each other better than we knew ourselves. We did everything together. We told each other every little secret. I was her amusement, and she was my hype man. Later on in high school, our different personalities led us to different friend circles. We still talked and hung out, though not as often. When I was 16, she moved an hour away, and we started talking even less frequently than before, touching base only every now and then. Small important little detail, her mother's hometown is about 4 hours from her new location, 3 from mine. I had gone to class early one day, something I never did. There was this girl that sat in the desk in front of me, and a friend that sat across from her already there. It was the three of us alone, so I pulled out my books and preoccupied myself until everyone else poured in. I started tuning into their conversation as I heard them talking about one of the students passing away in a bad car accident caused by a drunk driver. The friend inquired in a curious manner who it was. That's when she said it. She said my friend's name. I stopped her, my heart pounding so hard. Feels like it's going to jump out of my chest. It hurts to the point I want to throw up. I stopped them from proceeding with their discussion. I asked her to describe the student in question. She described my best friend. I feel like the breath has been sucked from my lungs. I can't breathe. I asked the teacher, whose ultimate goal was to make my hour with her hell. For the first time, as tears built up on my eyes, she became human. She excused me from class. To say I had a panic attack is putting it lightly. I called my mom. She came and got me to take me home. I sat there on the floor in my room. I felt like my mind was crumbling. The unbearable pain, my chest, I can't think straight. I started throwing up uncontrollably and my head was pounding. My friend since kindergarten left school when she got word of the passing. She found a mess of me laying there. She asked me to go for a ride, something we always did to find peace or just talk. As I sat there in the passenger seat trailer and broke, I can't keep it together. I don't even know where to start. I'm helpless. I decided to Google. That's when I found out her parents were in critical condition in their new hospital. I started throwing up again. I decided we have to go to them. They weren't the family that I was born into, but they were the family that raised me. Being young teens driving to a city 3 times the size, we didn't realize how many hospitals there are and HIPPA laws that apply. I returned home feeling defeated. When I walked in the door, my mom saw that a raggedy mess of me existed before her. She just hugged me tightly and I ugly cried. This was my first funeral, my first experience with death. I ended up getting the details of the funeral. It's going to be in the mom's hometown. It's 3 hours from mine and my best friend's hometown. My friend had supported me through the worst day of my life, accompanied me to the services. The thoughts on that 3-hour drive were heavier the closer we approached. What about her parents? I can't even think of how they feel. I would give anything to make this all not our current reality. Why them? The kindest people I knew. As we pulled into the cathedral parking lot, I didn't know if I was prepared to do this. If I walk in there, this becomes real. I didn't know how much more of this heavy heart I could take. My friend grabbed my hand and said we went. The services were beautiful, something you would see in a movie. It was so unreal. And then I saw them, her parents. As the services concluded, we stood in a long line of family and friends I recognised from my ventures under their roof, all who I hadn't seen in quite a few years. My best friend's parents have been included since they moved away. While in line, there was a guy about 7 years older than us, talking about my best friend to what I assume is his toddler son. He turns around and asks how we knew her. I say we've been best friends since we were babies. He says my name to me and I confirm. We said our condolences to one another. My friend went first as I prepared to face my best friend's immediate family. I didn't understand why I was so afraid to face them. It was the mom, dad and sister standing there bare to the room in front of them. I walked up to the sister who was first. Immediately she recognised me. When she stated my name, her face lit up. Her parents heard the commotion, then turned and immediately embraced me. When I walked back to the car with my friend, I just felt exhausted. I sat in the car and just cried. Then I felt too tired even for that. It was the quietest 3 hours I think either of us were prepared for. As soon as I got to my bed, it was even empty dreams. My mind was too tired and heavy to dream. I don't remember the few days that followed. It was all a blur. Now I would like to remind you that I mentioned I grew up in a rough background. My dad used to violently beat my mother in front of my brother and me. As a result, I suffer from PTSD, where I don't usually dream, and if I do, it's nightmares. Except, this night was different. I was at school, and the hallways were packed. The noise was drowning. I was by the stairs, and then my best friend walked up to me. She didn't say a word. I was so excited to see her, I just hugged her so tight. I was telling her how much I missed her. She's just taking it all in with a smile, quietly not saying a word. That's when it hits me. It's impossible. You're not supposed to be here. I rushed to the stairs, trying to make sense of what's going on. I rushed into class and sat down at an unusually packed classroom of chatting students. She walks into the class and pulls up a seat across from me. The room feels deafening now, not a noise as we're staring at one another. I get up and flee out of the door. The hallway's empty, then I stop in my tracks. How can I run from my best friend? I turn around, and there she is, already standing in front of me. It's like she was talking to me with telepathy. She's telling me it's okay. I don't have to be sad. I don't have to be scared. It was okay. She said she had to go. Then she turned to walk away. I tried to grab her. I wanted so bad to stop her. Please don't leave. I can't do this without you. I'm lost without you. With every step, she fades away a little more. And then there I stood, all alone. I ended up working for her mom as a personal assistant years later when I had my daughter. One day we exchanged accounts of our experiences to one another. My best friend came to her too, but in person. Different experience, but same message. I already planned out my entire life when I was in the last 3 months of high school. I worked my ass off to get scholarships and the grades needed to get into any university of my choice. I even took any part-time jobs I could in order to save money to move out for university. My family lived comfortably, couldn't really afford sending me to a different state to study, even with the loans and scholarships. So, I made it work. With savings tucked away in my bank account and my plan set, all I needed to do was graduate. My three mortal enemies were doing their best to make that impossible. I always found it stupid that I had three people on my back at school. It started with a milk throwing incident the first few months of high school. The ringleader of the three, Trevor, thought it would be hilarious to slam down 3 cartons full of milk in the cafeteria, spraying people. Everyone else just made some sounds of disapproval, but I said exactly how I felt. That these 3 were good-for-nothing wastes of air, and would end up arrested in a few years. They didn't take well to that comment. And for almost 4 years, they showed me just how much they hated me. I tried telling the principal about them, but the system was to punish both parties. I risked getting kicked out of school if the bullying came to light, and I felt my suffering wasn't all that bad. I just held my head high and took whatever came my way. With 3 months left in school, I found myself at the end of my rope. Trevor didn't just target myself. He had a long list of students he enjoyed tormenting. One of them had enough and tossed some rotten fish in Trevor's prized car in the morning. By the end of the day, the sun roasted the fish, causing the smell to be unbearable, even inside the school. He needed to get his car towed and professionally deep cleaned, and it still held the hint of the fish smell. The person who did it knew they might get killed for the prank, so they used me as a scapegoat. Even without proof, Trevor took the idea. While I waited for the bus home, I saw his red car screech down the street and thought nothing of it. Even after the 3 came storming out towards me, I didn't think to run. I didn't have time to do much besides curl into a ball as they gave me an undeserved ass-kicking. Despite being near a bus stop, no one called the cops or even thought to help. At least my textbooks in my backpack took most of the kicks to my stomach. They were smart enough to avoid my face during the short beating. Broken noses and black eyes tended to get more of a reaction out of people. In the end, they left me with a few sore ribs and a lot of bruises on my back and sides because I had curled around my bag. I didn't even get up after I heard them fleeing and car tires screeching away. The pain refused to die down. I stayed on the ground, trying to collect myself as I repeated, I just needed to deal with this for a few more months. I needed to graduate, then get the hell out of this crappy town. I breathed slowly, trying not to hurt my ribs by taking in more air than needed. After a few minutes, I sensed eyes on my back. Fearing one of them stayed behind, I risked a glance upwards to see a stranger looking down on me. Our eyes met, and a lazy half-smile spread across his face. "Do you have a light?" He got down low to the ground, resting his arm on his knees. I thought he looked too old to be sitting on his heels like that. His hair was completely grey, but his face was without too many wrinkles. Only some crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, and a set of wrinkles appeared at the corner of his mouth, making me guess he was no older than 40. I did something that I would always regret. I dug around in a small pocket of my backpack, aware of all the pains in my body as I moved. Earlier that day, I found a cheap lighter with some life still left in it. I had a bad habit of picking up anything useful. I took furniture from the side of the road to fix it up and sell, or would pick up pens in the hallway at school. I didn't have use for a lighter, and yet I still grabbed it. I held out the small orange plastic lighter for him to take. At that moment, I didn't even question why an adult like himself asked a clearly injured teenager for a lighter instead of trying to help. It took a few tries, but he lit a cigarette and held out the lighter to give back. I refused and muttered he could keep it. The same half-smile came back, and he honestly gave me a bad vibe. "Did those 3 have a reason to rough you up, or were they being pricks?" the stranger asked, without offering any assistance to a still injured teen. He could have at least pretended to care and not look so damn amused by the whole thing. I gritted my teeth and sat up. I wanted to get away from this weirdo. Everything about him freaked me out a little. He wore a dress shirt and suit jacket, but the shirt was unbuttoned, showing his collarbone, and his jacket had seen better days. His voice sounded like he smoked at least a pack a day for most of his life, and he didn't put much energy into anything he said. "They're just pricks. It's fine. I'll get over it," I said, a bit more bitterly than I expected to sound. "I could take care of them for you. After all, you sort of paid me already." He showed off the lighter in his hand and shook it once. I didn't know what he was implying, but didn't like it. He sounded ready to really do some harm to the 3 that just kicked my sides in, but he didn't want to help when they were attacking. Did he watch the entire thing or just come across me by chance after they left? No, he mentioned those three, so he at least saw who was here. I didn't trust him at all and suddenly regretted doing him any kind of favour. It's fine, I don't. Before I could finish, he reached into his pocket and flicked over a small business card. It landed on the ground in front of me and I hesitated picking it up. The white card only has a handwritten phone number on the front. I'm only in this town for another week. You should make up your mind soon. Later, kiddo. The old man got to his feet and took a long inhale of his cigarette. He barely acknowledged me, still sitting on the ground as he walked away, slightly hunched with his hands in his pockets. The card and the smell of tobacco smoke, the traces he'd really been there. I made a mistake of tucking the card away in my bag in a spot where I wouldn't bend. I didn't have any plans of calling him, but the paper was stiff and good for a very small study note. I didn't have any plans on rocking the boat. I ignored the three dumbasses when I went to school the next day. My parents didn't notice how stiff I walked when I arrived home that night, but my mother did see a small bruise on the side of my face. I played it off as an accidental injury. I refused to give my attackers any kind of attention. I just needed to make it through a few more months and I'd be in the clear. Thankfully, they seemed to move on to another target for a while. The only one who noticed my mood and did anything about it was my senior dog, Luna. We got her when I was about 5 or so, and she'd been with me most of my life. She was also the only thing I didn't really have a plan for. I couldn't let her stay home when I went to university, and the dorms didn't allow pets. I wrote an email asking if I could bring her along for part of the first year. I loved her more than anything else in my life, and sadly, she was sick. I doubted she would last more than a few months. Due to her age and illness, the school was considering letting her stay until she passed of natural causes, knowing it may happen soon. I made it through a full month before the worst happened. Dealing with a beatdown or harassment at school was easy. But those three bastards did something I could never forgive them for, and gave me a reason to call the strange man I met at the bus stop a few weeks before. With only 2 more months left of school, I stayed up late to study with Luna at my side. I often wondered if she felt any pain in those last few days, but never showed any signs of it. I reached out to pet her golden fur, and she made me aware that she wanted to go outside to do her business. Lately, she wanted to go outside pretty often, and needed to do so a few times a night. Knowing I'd be awake for a few more hours, I went with her and helped her go down the stairs. She didn't have any issues running for a few minutes if she wanted, but the stairs slowed down. I opened the back door to let her out and started making myself something to eat. I wanted to be awake so I could study for the night. I didn't see Luna in the dark backyard, but that was normal. Just as I finished up making up my sandwich, I heard a terrible sound coming from the front of the house. A sound I'll never forget and will always haunt the back of my mind. Luna should have been in the backyard. I shouldn't have assumed the yelp before the sound of tires screeching away was her, but I spent most of my life with her. I knew what she sounded like. I dropped whatever was in my hand and ran as fast as I could out front, and just in time to see a red car turning the corner at the end of the street. My entire body turned to ice, and my stomach flipped, seeing her small shape in the middle of the road. I wasn't even aware I screamed when I ran to her, waking some of the neighbours. It's not important going into details about that night. We made her as comfortable as possible and said goodbye at the emergency vet office. Pieces of a headlight are the only thing left behind from the car that hit her. We figured the lock on the back gate rusted loose, letting Luna get out into the street that way. Luna liked the new kids across the street, and I caught her on their lawn once before. I put a rock against the gate thinking it might keep it shut, but my father must have moved the rock the last time he opened the door and never replaced it. I didn't blame him or the rusted gate lock. I only blamed the owner of the red car. I took 2 days off school. My parents wanted me to take more time off, but I needed to finish those last few months. I stayed silent, walking around in a haze, just trying to stay focused in class. The first day back, I walked through the student parking lot and froze. Those 3 pricks were leaning against Trevor's car, smoking and carrying on. His red car with a broken headlight. I blacked out for a few minutes. My body is moving on its own. I dropped my backpack and went over to them and just went feral on Trevor. I got him to the ground and gave him a bloody nose as his two friends, Ben and Thompson, stood shocked. A teacher saw the one-sided fight and pulled me away. Trevor gave those two and was fearful about not helping. By some miracle, we all didn't get dragged to the office or parents called. They just packed up and booked it out of there, leaving the teacher unsure of what to do. He didn't have the victims, and he didn't want to deal with all the drama calling my parents would bring. I'm fairly certain that if those three stayed, they would have needed to explain why I exploded on them. That would bring to light so much of their past harassment, and the accusation of them being involved in a hit and run. I doubted they wanted to graduate, but if Trevor's father found out about the cause of the broken headlights, he'd be pissed. I heard he already paid to fix a lot on the car after those three got drunk and went to smash a bunch of mailboxes earlier in the year. I got sent home with a warning and some very sore knuckles. Though it didn't feel like enough. I wanted to kill them. They took away the one I loved the most in the world, and so far, they haven't received any punishment. I needed to do something fast. We filed a police report, and I called them to tell them about the broken headlights on Trevor's car, with the police just saying they would look into it. That wasn't good enough. Even if they did find out Trevor was the one who killed Luna, then what? He might only do some community service. No. More needed to be done. I sat in my room, ignoring my parents requesting me to come down for dinner, trying to think of what to do. Luna's bed sat empty, and it tore at my heart. My study books are still scattered on my desk from that night. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. Looking them over, the small card caught my attention. I did end up using it for a study card, but the phone number was still on the back. The idea felt crazy. I wasn't really going to call that weirdo for help. Was I? The memory of Luna's yelp came back, and I made up my mind. I didn't care about the risks or cost. I just wanted them to suffer. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number. It rang a few minutes, and I thought I was out of luck. Then it connected, and I held my breath, not knowing what to say. I didn't even know this guy's name. We met a month ago. I gave you a lighter, I blurted out, not even knowing if I reached the right person. Oh, that's right. Those three still giving you some trouble? Need me to deal with them for you? I hesitated, wondering how much to tell him. In the end, I didn't say much. If he was willing to do this job, then he didn't need to know the reason. Yes, please do something about them. How do we go about this? I asked. He stayed silent on the other end of the phone, and I could almost hear that creepy, lazy smile. I heard a faint sound I realized to be a lighter and a few more seconds of silence before he told me when and where to meet him. The whole thing is simply crazy and dangerous. I agreed to meet a strange man at night just because I wanted revenge. Grief makes people do some very careless things. The stranger arrived first. We still haven't given each other our names, and I thought that might be for the best. I slowly walked up to him, and my body turned cold again seeing Trevor's car. How the stranger knew where it would be, parked ahead of time, was a mystery. Then again, there was only one bar in town that didn't care about serving teenagers, so he might have guessed where the three troublemakers would end up on a Friday night. So, what's the plan? I asked him, looking around. Trevor parked his car across the street from the bar, so it might appear he was inside the burger place and not drinking. A few people lingered outside smoking and watching us. They must have known Trevor and knew about how much his car cost. I honestly didn't know the first thing about cars. I think he was old and cost a fortune, but that was about it. A car is a car to me. My hired help was dressed in the same thing I met him in. An open, slightly wrinkled suit jacket and dress shirt with 2 buttons undone. I glanced down and noticed he wasn't wearing any shoes, not even sandals. It was warm enough to go without, but the street was dirty with glass around. I started to think I made a very big mistake calling him for help. With a lit cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth, he gave a half smile. His grey eyes almost appeared silver in the night. "This is the car, right?" he asked, nodding towards Trevor's parked car. He has since replaced the headlight, but I knew it was his. When I nodded, I didn't even have enough time to stop the man before we lifted a bare foot up and kicked off the car's mirror. My legs turned to jelly as I watched him do more damage to the car. He dented the driver's side door, smashed the headlight, and tore off the license plate by the time Trevor and his two goons came out of the bar, stumbling along and screaming. "Make them follow us," the man said, and took my wrist, forcing me to run with him down the street. I couldn't keep up. He dragged me along painfully, and I heard Trevor get into his car to chase us down. He wouldn't be able to get away from them, and that wasn't his plan. After a few blocks, we found an empty street near a park entrance and let go of my wrist. I tripped, falling painfully to the ground. I sat up in time to see the strange man go into the middle of the empty road to stare down the oncoming red car. I don't know if Trevor was drunk, pissed off, or a mixture of the two, but he did something I didn't expect. He put his foot down on the gas and hit the man in the middle of the road, his body flipping off the hood, cracking the windshield, then landing twisted with a loud crack. I nearly got sick from the sound. Trevor wasn't able to get control of his car, causing him to swerve off the road, hitting a light post. The sound of the impact echoed through the street and slammed into my chest. I started to dry heave, panic, and stress shaking my body. I didn't want anyone to die, right? This was all far too much, and the nightmare just kept going. I needed to help them, so I got up to head towards the car, thinking it was far too late for the man in the road. I stopped a few feet from the car when I saw a shape twisted on the ground by the street post. I did puke then, realizing what happened. Either Ben or Thompson didn't wear their seatbelts and got tossed from the car on impact. Trevor somehow was moving in the driver's seat. My body refused to move after dumping my dinner in the road. All of this was far too much to handle. Two left. I was hoping for more fun, you know? I didn't think it was possible to be even more terrified than how I felt seeing the car wreck. The sound of the deep voice behind me was almost enough to give me a heart attack. I sank to my knees, looking over to see the man I called standing up, looking perfectly fine. He cracked his neck, and the smile on his face caused my breath to stop dead in my lungs. I wasn't aware I called down hell on those three until I saw that smile. The backseat door opened and Ben fell out onto the street, his face bloody and bruised. My body refused to move, and I only watched as the man started walking over to the helpless teenager. Ben knew to run, but didn't know why. He stumbled along, his face dripping blood as the man let him whimper and get as far as the park stone steps. His hands in his jacket pocket as he hunched over to look over Ben with teeth showing. "I'll let you fight back. I want to have some fun, you know. Do you have any weapons on you? A knife? A nail file? Anything?" the stranger asked in a tone that got more and more excited. Ben, half crawling up the stone steps, leaving spots of blood behind, started sobbing. He looked to be in such pain and didn't have a chance of getting away. He pleaded for his mother to come and save him, the sounds tearing painfully at my chest. "Nothing? God, you're so boring." Reaching out a hand, the man grabbed Ben's head by his short hair and slammed his face down into the stone step again and again. I jumped at each crack of bone smashing on the cement. My body is shaking and my mind is going numb from the sight. This shouldn't be possible. None of this was right. A person shouldn't be that strong and so easily be able to turn a person's face into mush. And he shouldn't even be able to get up and walk around after getting hit by a car. A new sound made up all the jumps. Trevor got out of his car, his eyes hazy, and a gun in his hand. I didn't know where he got a gun from, but I saw, almost glad to see it. He fired again, the bullet tearing through the face of the one who killed his friend as he turned to face the weapon. Another bullet missed, but the first one nearly tore one side of the man's jaw off, making his smile appear even more gruesome. "That's it. Show me something fun," he shouted, through a mouth of gore, causing his words to slur a little, and with a crazed look in his eyes. The sight made Trevor lose it. He fired wildly and emptied his gun in under a minute. One bullet nearly hit my face, but the odd man moved as fast as lightning to take the hit in the shoulder, shielding my body with his own. I didn't understand why he cared about my life. How could a monster like him kill a person with his bare hands, then defend another? He stood up, face slowly mending itself. I honestly thought I made a deal with the devil at that moment. I croaked out a half word, trying to fight through the fear and beg the man to not kill Trevor. This went far enough. My mind couldn't take seeing another death. My voice failed me. Even if it didn't, I doubted anything I said or did would change the outcome at that point. Trevor's gun failed him. He either ran out of bullets or it jammed. He turned on his heel, attempting to make a run for it. His legs were shaking and uneven. The man in the wrinkled suit jacket follows a few steps behind. I thought I heard a humming coming from him for a second. Trevor tripped and screamed. His mind and body shut down the same way mine did. The man gave him a chance to fight back. He stood over the crying teenager, waiting to see what he would do. When nothing happened, the humming stopped to be replaced by a cracking noise. I thought my mind was already overloaded, but what I saw next really put me over the edge into insanity. The man's face changed. Countless shapes of animal faces came from his neck, twisted into each other and shifted like liquid from different forms. Sounds of different creatures come from that terrible sight mingled into each other. All the voices trying to be heard over each other and the cries becoming warped, as if it came out through a nearly broken speaker. All at once, those shapes came down on Trevor with thousands of teeth appearing to tear into his body. Another noise came, a yelping scream from Trevor that was much like the last sound Luna made. I blacked out for a while. I don't think I closed my eyes. I just refused to remember what happened after I saw Trevor get ripped apart. I was vaguely aware of someone speaking and dragging me to my feet, just to have my legs give out again. A sharp pain to my cheek forced my mind back into the present. A man dressed in a uniform stood and flashing lights filled the night. I saw the monster sitting on the curb with handcuffs around his wrists. His jacket looked spotless, but his dress shirt was stained with blood. He sneered at the cops standing in front of him, rage clearly on the officer's face. "Did he hurt you, kid?" the other cop asked, and it took me a few minutes to realize he was addressing me. I shook my head, unable to answer. I thought I heard the other cop talking with the killer, saying how the man shouldn't be in our small town for any reason. He noticed I moved my head and called his partner over to watch over the cuffed monster, wearing a human mask. I found a new officer standing in front of me, looking down with an expression so cold it cut through my shock. What in the ever-living hell did those three to deserve you calling that man over for all this? He demanded in a harsh but low voice. This man knew what I'd done. He was aware that I'd called that man over and was the cause of the 3 deaths. I searched my brain trying to figure out just what was so important I put all of this into motion. They killed Luna, my dog, I answered meekly, still in a state of shock. All this for a dog? He asked disgustingly and nodded towards the bloody street. One teen twisted and broken from the car crash, another with his face smashed in, the blood leaking down the stone steps, and the final one in pieces scattered around the street. I looked at each one of them, my stomach turning. If I didn't puke earlier, I would have then. My eyes landed on the stranger's face. He looked over his shoulder towards us with such a grim smile on his face it caused my head to swim. I looked up when the officer cursed seeing a new cruiser pulling up. This was a crime scene and it should be swarming with cops. A new fear started to spread in my stomach. Would they arrest me as well? It appeared like only one cop so far knew about my deal with the monster, but wasn't I still responsible in some way? I didn't have time to think about my future when a new scene played out. A pair of police came from the new cruiser, and the one that spoke with me tried to keep one back. One looked familiar, and my gut sank to the ground the moment my mind clicked to why I would know his features. I told you I would help with any cases if that mad dog came back. Now let me through, Chief. What are you trying to hide from me? The new arrival spoke, trying to look around the road. His partner grabbed his arm to drag him away, far too late. His eyes landed on the crumpled form in the steps, and it took both men to hold him back. He started to yell the dead boy's name. His dead son's name. The yells turned to screams, and all at once, he became silent the moment we made eye contact. He knew who made the phone call that ended his son's life. All three of them took a hold of him in some way, trying to keep his gun from his hand. I simply watched, almost welcoming death by his actions. It felt fair he shot me that night. While all the police fought to keep one in line, no one kept watch of the one who killed 3 teens that night. He stood up, stretched, and walked over to the group in no hurry. He kept his arms cuffed behind his back, even though we all knew breaking the metal would be easy for him. The father fought harder, screaming how he wanted to kill all of us. Are you threatening the one who hired me? We met before, didn't we? You know the deal. I protect the ones I do a job for against retaliation. If you harm one hair on that child's head, then... His calm and yet arrogant tone got cut off. Oh, what? You'll kill me? The man shouted, face red and veins popping from his forehead. You have a lovely daughter, don't you? The words barely whisper, and it's almost impossible to hear them from where I sat. The man went pale and limp in the hold of the others. He shook his head, not believing the threat, not wanting to believe any of this happened. You wouldn't dare hurt her. I'll kill you if you ever even look at her. He threatened. I'll have no reason to even remember she exists, as long as you forget about the one who called me. But if I find out you went ahead and did something stupid, well, I have a skill of getting the young and pretty ones to come to me. They tend to enjoy our time together too. That smile I hated came back over his face. The idea of what his words implied caused the officer to react. He drew his gun so quickly the others didn't stop him. The smile was literally blown off the man's face. The second time that night, his jaw hung limp and broken. He didn't fall over, but rather let the blood pour to the ground with his head hanging down for a few seconds. He raised it to press his forehead against the gun, grey eyes shining in the dark. He wanted to be shot again, to see the reactions of the rest when they realised a bullet wouldn't kill the monster that appeared that night, and to watch as all hope and sense of logic were taken from 4 adult men. The gun was taken away, so that didn't happen. I watched the officer that spoke with me take charge of the situation. He packed the cuffed and healing monster in the back seat of one cruiser and told one of the shaken co-workers to take me home. I prayed the last I ever saw of that man was the back of his head in a cop car. I thought I was going to be arrested for my involvement. I did, in a way, hire a man to kill 3 people. That fact would hold up in court. In the moment, I felt so numb, I would have accepted any sentence handed down. But oddly enough, nothing happened. The officer dropped me off in front of my place, unsure what to say. He warned me not to leave town. I nodded and walked inside to curl up in bed, trying to go over what happened that night. In the morning, I heard they covered the entire thing up with a fiery car crash. No mention of the murders. Just that Trevor, Ben and Thompson died due to one of them drink driving and crashing into a streetlight. The bodies were so burned, and yet they already identified them. I couldn't bring myself to leave my room for months. I expected to be taken away at any moment or have that man come by again, asking for more victims. I lost my scholarships and missed out on my final exams. My parents didn't have a clue or I suddenly turned into a hermit. They gently tried everything to get me back to normal, without much luck. Then they adopted a small, sick and weak kitten. Neither of them thought it would pull through. It needed care and feeding every few hours, and that made me focus on something besides myself. I felt something besides fear and misery when treating the small kitten. When our new pet got the all clear from the vet, I finally felt relieved. I'd helped someone. It was as if saving one life filled the void that had been created when I'd taken 3 others, but not fully filled it. We kept the kitten and named it Tabby. That small bundle of fur gave my life purpose. Over the next few years, I got my life back on track. I went to school to become a vet. I knew I couldn't save everyone that came to the clinic, but I did my best to do whatever I could for every animal I met. I almost forgot how I felt at the end of high school for a while. I even managed to move out of my parents' place and into a small apartment. Things were going just fine after so long of trying to stay above the water. And then, a cat came into the clinic. A small orange one with injuries from a BB gun. He'd been starved and shot. The neighbours were the one who brought him in. They wanted to take him home or try and keep him away from the owners. Without any proof that the owner's children were the ones harming the cat, we would need to release him back to the owners and not the caring neighbours who brought him in. That old hate came back, an anger that filled my mouth and tasted like acid. I needed to do something. I had to save this poor cat that did nothing to harm anyone. After some minor investigation, I found out the parents treated their children worse than their cat. CPS had been called, but it would take too damn long for the kids to be removed. And if we returned their cat, he would die in their hands very soon afterwards. I was quickly at the end of my rope. The police didn't have time to do anything, or simply didn't care. Maybe the children could be saved, but that little poor cat, they never even called him. For some reason, I kept the old study card with a certain number written on the back of it. The memories of that bloody night flashed into my mind. I had no right deciding the fate of these strangers. I could just steal the cat from the clinic, but if anyone reported it, I risked losing my job. I didn't care about myself, just the animals I could save while working. The card felt heavy in my hand, a heavy card for a heavier choice. What weighed down on my mind the most was how eager I felt calling the number. I no longer felt human if I was able to bring down death on others so easily. My sense of remorse faded a long time ago. I set the card down, deciding to only call the number if I couldn't keep the harmed cat out of the hands of the ones who wanted to kill him. If there was no other option, I resolved to call in a mad dog to solve a problem.